Happy Monday and welcome to Casting the Net, Reeling in Holistic Health, where we care about your mental health and well-being. I'm your host, Coach Rice, and I want to make sure that you tune in every Monday at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time, where I have my special guest on to talk about real issues that matter most. I want you to check us out on YouTube, Facebook Live, on Business Facebook page, also on the Be Awesome Network. Stay tuned. I think you're going to really like this next guest. Happy Monday and welcome to Casting the Net, where we care about your mental health and well-being. I am your host, Coach Rice, and with me today I have Simone Swartz, and she is an Army veteran, author, military sexual trauma survivor, nonprofit founder, PTSD life coach and expert, and mom of three. And she also has the latest book that's out called PTSD and What Helped Me. And it's a step-by-step guide, and we're gonna do it, we're gonna dive into it. But before we start, Simone, tell us, where you're from and how did you embark upon this journey into PTSD?
Yes. So I am living in New York right now, and I grew up in Maine. I kind of moved around a lot. In the military, I was stationed in Georgia, and that is where my story began. Where this new PTSD story began was because I was sexually assaulted in the military by a fellow soldier. And at the time, I did not know that you could get PTSD from trauma other than combat. And I think still today, a lot of people don't hear that message. So that's why I talk about what I do, because I went with the trauma and holding on to the shame, and I occurred many addictive behaviors, which would be self-medicating behaviors, because I didn't know my diagnosis, right? I didn't know that all kinds of traumas can produce the same things as combat PTSD. And there's a new study out that it's 2015, I believe the study was out, so not too new, but the brain scans of those from combat and from children living in domestic violence, their brain scans are exactly the same. So it's showing that anybody who undergoes severe trauma, whether it's just one event or a CPSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, so trauma over a certain amount of time, your brain is affected the same way. So this is why I decided to write my book, to help others, to compile all the knowledge that I found myself, finding my own healing journey. Once I was diagnosed, I said, I can't let PTSD take the rest of my life. It already took 10 years going through this and not knowing what it was and living just not to my full potential. So I said, I'm going to, God gave me these solutions because I was on such a avid search for solutions once I had the diagnosis. So I compiled them, and also I started a nonprofit that gave service dogs to sexual assault survivors. So now that I'm at this part in my healing journey, I'm comfortable speaking about what's happened. I focus on the future, and I truly believe that anybody else can do the same. Sexual assault is a horrible, horrible thing. But it happens to so many of us. And that's something too that needs to be talked about, because you feel like you're alone, but the stats are 1 in 3 women are assaulted and 1 in 4 men. And the numbers are higher for military. So, and that's just reported. So we can kind of suspect that some people taking those surveys might not even want to disclose that at that time. So those are just the reported statistics.
I am so glad we're talking about this, and thank you so much for being so open because a lot of times this is one of the, especially from the military, community is
Yeah.
hidden. And what's interesting is that it's not enough, you know, people to help in that area to bring out their voice about it because what they have to go through if they talk
Yeah.
about it. So it takes courage to actually talk about this. And I just want to thank you for opening up like that. And so can you take us back like to a moment when you realize silence just is no longer an option?
Yes. When I decided to start my nonprofit, right, when I'd gotten my service dog, I had done so many other healing modalities. Again, there was so much that I had to write the book about it. But when I got to that point, uh, that, I felt, and I don't want to say got over my trauma, but, for lack of a better term, when I got over my trauma, when I was comfortable with where I was and what had happened, um, I said, why am I, this wasn't my fault, right? The sexual
Right.
assault, you should feel no shame. Who should feel shame is your abuser. That's who should, be scared, but I said, now I'm at this point, I need to use my voice. I want to. Why wouldn't I? That this is nothing that should carry shame. And the more that we use our voice as survivors, predators are going to feel unsafe. They're the ones going to feel uncomfortable because they know that they're going to be called out, and that behavior that infringes on another human being is not acceptable in 2026. So I decided to make a post on social media on a crowdfunding website. And I mean, to be honest, my mom didn't even know. So this was kind of like,
Mm.
my ripping the Band-Aid off, coming out, and really truly finding my healing. Like, okay, I can speak about this, because it doesn't affect me the way it does anymore. And I want my truth to be told. And so now I speak on it just as a way to, help myself in the healing journey, but also, I don't want anybody else to feel ashamed of what they've been through. And, that's why, I do the life coaching, because I've been there. I know how people feel. And, it's we're now at a new era where, survivors and our voices, that is all we have. We don't have justice. The laws and the courts have not caught up to, where we are as a society, condemning sexual violence and violence against women. So yeah, of survivors, all we have is our voice. And that's why I've decided to use it.
Awesome. And so with you being a, you know, I'm trying to think if I want to ask you another question before this one. I will before I ask this one. So,
Yeah.
how did PTSD? What did it look like in your everyday life during, before you began your healing journey? What did that look like for you?
So I would say that, PTSD it's very easy to mask, in America, maybe even in, other places, but drinking daily, is a very acceptable social norm. And drinking daily, doing anything, toxic like that daily is very destructive, not only to yourself, but to your relationships, to your life. You're if a destructive behavior becomes your only joy, then you're not, other things, your career isn't going to take off, your self-esteem isn't going to take off. So my whole life, for a time, became all around masking what had happened. And I got to the point I didn't even really realize, right? I was just going on thinking, okay, this is life, just living for the next drink, risky behaviors, um, all kinds, uh, I had a big like disrespect of authority, right? I wasn't, I had much anger and uncomfortable situations around authority, not feeling safe, not feeling heard. And so, I had this life view that, the world is against me, that, things never get better. Everything, is going to go wrong. And, that's trauma, that's unhealed trauma. Yes, bad things do happen, but if we don't have that will to keep going and be healthy, um, these behaviors and, PTSD can be fatal. So my message is that PTSD is treatable, and it doesn't have to be a lifelong sentence. I decided when I started my healing journey to get back into exercise. And I want to say that I replaced a negative addiction with a positive one. But, over exercising can be bad too. But I think trauma survivors almost need to really obsess over something healthy, because you're so stuck in what has happened, and you don't know how many years you've been going on living these unhealthy patterns. You really have to 1,000% get into something that gives your life joy, and you have to create that. And so for me, physical exercise was a huge lifesaver, and that replaced like going to the bar, going out, or things like this, just self-loathing. I started to really respect my body again, and treat myself with respect. So, and also exercise reroutes the canals in your brain. It creates more elasticity and more connections. So that's gonna physically override your old trauma responses and
Yes.
restructure your brain. So exercise is a number one thing in PTSD recovery.
That's a good defense mechanism because people use many, but exercise is always a good defense mechanism to use. It's a healthy one. And
Yes,
so
you're right.
when you're a PTSD life coach, but
Yes.
then there is counseling. How do you deal with, working with clients with PTSD and not overriding, not stepping into counseling? Uh,
Yeah.
in the counseling
Okay.
arena, well, you can't because you're a life coach, but
Yeah.
how do you make those two, how do you differentiate between the two? I guess
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. So, yes, counseling, therapists, and a life coach are definitely two different things. And the way I describe it is, in my clients, I do make sure that they are, before they work with me, that they are on under medical care and attention, so that they do have a physician and they do have, a therapist or a psychologist. But a life coach is so different. And it is a missing piece, I feel, that a lot of people need in their life. And not even just for trauma, but even just life in general. A general life coach can help anybody, because what life coaches do, we hold our clients accountable, and we're not friends, right? We're not just talking and gossiping and uh, there's some things that you can't talk to your friends about, but you can talk to your life coach about it. But we're going to not just talk about what's going on in your life. We're going to, the coach is going to guide you to real solutions. And like I said, hold you accountable. And because of all the things I've been through and my nonprofit work, I actually have set guidelines and steps that can get you to where you want to go. And it's I feel that the community is missing a lot, right? There's not a lot of social supports anymore, and that's where the life coach comes in. Is that okay? You're free to actually tell this person confidentially, the things that you would like to change in your life. And it's a really good social support, and to hold you accountable, and for somebody who's been there. Counselors, therapists, and doctors a lot of the times are just reading, from their studies and haven't gone through what you have firsthand. So that's another difference, is that, me as a PTSD life coach, I personally know the things that you're
Walk through
dealing
that.
with. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like that's can be very helpful for people. And again, where you could talk to a friend, but the life coach actually has solutions, and that's where, we guide you to actual results. So
Yeah. And therapists, they train to deal with PTSD, but the connection may be different when you haven't walked through it. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and also there is their scope of practice can be very limited. Where I'm a life
right.
coach, I can recommend all types of therapies, right? I can't deliver the therapies, but I can not prescribe, but I can give you solutions more than pharmaceutical, right? I can go through all these kinds of solutions that are available for PTSD, and then
Move them forward.
you take that information and you decide what would be helpful. But even like going to a chiropractor, they can only recommend chiropractic care. So a life coach is real generalized, and has so many tools in our toolkit that we can offer our clients help with. So that's a difference too.
When what was the hardest part about telling your story publicly?
The hardest part was wondering if my attacker was going to see this, right?
Mm,
It had been, 15 years, and he got to stay in the military. He got promoted. I got a discharge, an uncharacterized
mm,
discharge, and I had to fight to overturn that and change it from uncharacterized to honorable, which I did, because my records showed the actual attack and that nobody did anything. And so the Army was responsible. And, this story, unfortunately, has happened over 10,000 times. They were giving the same paperwork to many, many other survivors of military sexual trauma, and also returning soldiers from war showing signs of traumatic brain injury and PTSD, and they just discharged you instead of giving you medical care and attention that would have solved the problem right away. With PTSD, the quicker that you get help, the quicker you're able to move on. It's when you don't get help and you stay stuck in these behaviors for years and years, that's when it can be very serious. But if you're
yes.
able to, right after the trauma, right after something happened, get right into appropriate care, you won't have PTSD. You won't suffer. You will be able to reroute, what's going on up here so quickly, and having the right support. There's people that do go through trauma that don't have PTSD. So, that's the difference, is that the sooner that you get appropriate care, the trauma in your behaviors don't stay with you. So that my discharge happened to many others. And so, that was one thing, like the backlash of, wow, what will happen if I tell this story? But my need for my own mental health and to get my story out and to speak my truth, that was my push to say, okay, whatever happens is happens because this is the truth. And, I'm not going to be scared anymore, and nobody's going to silence me. And, you know, that's, it was
It's
one of
so
the best
sad.
decisions.
It's so
Yeah.
sad that the perpetrator gets promoted.
Yeah.
And the cycle keeps going on and on.
Right.
And that's so
Yeah.
sad because that's what weakens the ability to come forward is the fact that you feel almost
Right.
like it's almost like learned helplessness. It's like,
Yeah.
how can I get help I need if they're not going to do anything? So
Right.
sad that
Well, and
survivors have to go through that.
yeah, I feel that the way the military handled the situation actually made my trauma worse. As I said,
Yeah.
that if I would have gotten help right away, I could have stayed in the military, and I, would have fulfilled my duty that I wanted to. I signed up in time of war. I did not want to end my career so short. And so that trauma of having my career ended and my whole life goal at that was my last, that was my last choice, right? Like, okay, let's do the military. I'm gonna make this my life goal. And so that being taken away was almost more traumatic than the attack itself. So
Yeah.
that's another reason why I speak up and tell my story, because, the knowledge and the truth needs to come out, what really does happen. And, the military and pretty much every system, trying to protect itself. Um, we're going to have a turning point here where survivors are protected over systems that no longer protect us. So.
That's awesome. Let's get into your book. How did writing your book, become part of your own transformation?
So I started out just on my discovery, right? I'm a little bit OCD. When I get onto something, I dive real deep into the subject, and that's what I was doing with my PTSD diagnosis. I said, "Wow, this is like, cancer, right? Like, how could this is? I have a name for it. How do people overcome this, right? It's a diagnosis, and I can finally find solutions for this, right? um and yeah, people even recover from cancer, so why can't I recover from PTSD? So I decided to try everything out there, literally everything that is available for PTSD therapy I have written in my book. And that's where I decided, well, okay, why am I just holding on to all this knowledge, all these things I've tried or things I haven't tried, but I listed in the book. Why hold on to it? And that was that God moment where God said, I gave you this gift. It helped you. Now, if you don't help others with it, then that's not good, right? Like this is your new goal, is to share what I've given you with others. And that was just that light bulb moment that, wow, there is not another book out here that's just a step-by-step guide. There's memoirs about PTSD and
Right.
all kinds of trauma and, things like, and, if you want to hear people's story, that can be helpful. But I didn't want to tell my story in detail. I don't feel like that helps people who are really trying to find recovery from PTSD. So I just, put simple, like I said, step by step, easy to follow things to get somebody closer to health and mental health wellness. Um, and no filler, no fluff, and just
Yes.
sharing all these solutions. And because I'm not in a field scope of practice, I can list everything, and the survivor can decide what they think will work for them. Because I've listed FDA methods, non-FDA approved, traditional medicine, non-traditional medicine. I feel that PTSD is not just a mental condition, right? PTSD affects our whole life. And so that's
Hmm.
why I call my solution the whole human solution, because you do have to attack PTSD on so many levels: mentally, of course, physically, spiritually, financially. PTSD affects finances,
Yes.
and socially. So, if you don't, the last step for me, and I believe for everybody on their healing journey, is giving back in a way. Because if
Yes.
you don't give back, and at a soup kitchen or whatever way that feels right for you to give
Hmm.
back, then you can easily get pulled back into depression, where your life doesn't have purpose, and you went through all that for what, right? So
Right.
there's so just going to counseling is not enough. And that's where my book and where I step in, and the life coach is so important, because it's healing is much more than just going to a therapy 1 hour a month or something. So
Right. And so in your book, that's why you call it PTSD and what helped me,
yes.
because you went on that journey and now you want to share it with others. And so what
Yeah.
was one step that changed everything for you that's in your book?
So I have a whole chapter on service dogs. Service dogs, my service dog Gunner
Mm.
was a huge, huge help for me. And although service dogs are not for everyone, that's a huge commitment. But I feel that service dogs and sexual assault survivors are an amazing pair. Service dogs are not humans, right?
Right.
They connect with us on a whole nother level, and they're not. If our trauma was done to us by another human, right, we can feel safe around an animal, right? More than
Okay.
maybe connecting with another human, right, at first. And so I really am a huge advocate for service dogs and PTSD survivors. But I've also found great relief in the stellate ganglion block. I've been having that procedure for a time now, and that's wonderful for my PTSD. Again, that's, it's to each person.
Right.
There's been mixed results, but for me, I've really enjoyed that procedure. I've tried mushrooms, psychedelics, which are now being tested at an FDA level and about to be approved. And this is centuries old therapy,
Mhm.
for all things. So microdosing is, finally becoming recognized by the medical community. So there's many different ways to find healing from PTSD.
Okay. And so, now that you have your nonprofit in your book and you're now a coach, what's next?
So I founded the nonprofit. I've stepped down, and now I'm promoting my book and doing public speaking. Um, so yeah, what's next? I would just love to share my message on a larger level. I am looking for a publisher for my book, so I'll just throw that out there, because I've self-published, and I would love to find a larger publisher to share my message, because I feel now is the time, with everything happening in the news, and this movement of survivors using our voice. It needs to be amplified, and we will use our voice and amplify it until justice is served, and until we don't need to use our voice anymore, and until all humans are respected and sexual assault is no longer protected, right? It's out in the open. So yeah, I will use my voice until solutions are really found in society.
Awesome.
So that's the next step, just to share my message with as many people as possible.
That is
And
awesome. What would you say to a survivor who is still, afraid to speak up?
right, yeah, yeah, male or female, of course. I would say that you're not alone, that everything that you're feeling is completely normal. It's PTSD and these feelings is just your body trying in your mind trying to protect itself so it doesn't have that trauma happen again. So that's everything that's going on. You're not broken. You're actually working. Your body and your mind is working how it was designed, evolutionary, to keep you on guard, to, make you feel like, okay, I'm going to protect you. This was a horrible thing that happened. I don't want this to happen to you again. But when it becomes hindrance where you can't function and you're not living to your fullest capacity, that is a problem. That is when, you need to take some conscious steps to find healthy ways to overcome your symptoms, which is possible. That's my message, that PTSD is treatable. Uh, and there's so many of us survivors. So don't ever feel like is something a crazy, or unfortunately there's probably worse stories than what's happened to me. And it's just we're living in these times where sexual assault mostly happens to children. I do want to put this stat out here because it's so important, that sexual assault for children happens, I believe, 2 to 5 is the highest rate. So once you're in 12 years old or 18, that's too late to start talking about sexual assault and body autonomy and body safety with children. So sexual assault is an epidemic. And so there's nothing to feel shame about, but speaking up and asking for help. That is what you need to do. You need to find that self-love to say, hey, I'm going to take my life back. I'm not going to give it to my attacker anymore. My life is mine, and I need to make conscious decisions to progress my life.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And what is your onboarding process to when a client wants to see you?
Yeah, so I do have I have a complimentary clarity call, so they can reach out to me, and we just talk for 30 minutes and see what their goals are and see how I can help them and see if we're a good fit. So I do offer free calls to people who are interested in PTSD life coaching.
That's awesome. Well, Simone, thank you so much for sharing. And we will put all of your links in the video so people can reach
Thank
out
you.
to you. And thank you for sharing such a powerful story about your healing and how others can heal. And, um, we'll put your nonprofit in as well so that people can
Sure.
actually look through and donate and see how they can help you in that way as well. But people need help, and you know,
Yes.
and it's good to have, it's good that the military do have a life coach, because everything they do in therapy has to be reported as well. And so we don't report. So that's a good avenue
Right.
to go into. And so, thank you for sharing everything you have shared today. And to the audience, if you feel this video has helped you, or you want to reach out to Simone or purchase a book, we will have the links in there in the video so that you can reach out to her. And until then, have a fantastic Monday, and don't forget to subscribe and share the video and comment as well. Have a great Monday. It's your time to shine. Your journey to chart. Coach Rice wisdom will heal every heart. So join us now. Let's make life suffice. Welcome to Mondays with Coach Rice.